we have to get stuck into the news that blew everyone away 4 or 5 days ago now, and it is still dominating the headlines. I have to start with you on this, Crawls, because as a veteran journalist, it really took everybody by surprise, and that does not happen in rugby league.
When you think about it, you come to the biggest player swap stories in the last 50 years, and it ranks up with the biggest. Like Bobby Fulton leaving Manly and going to East in the 1970s, Ron Coote to East, Cooper Cronk to East, Sonnyville Williams to East, Brad Fittler. Seriously, like they're the biggest stories that I can remember. And Payne Haas was as big as any of them, if not bigger, because no one expected Payne Haas to leave the Broncos, even as late as 3 days before this deal, was announced. Michael Maguire was saying they think he's going to stay and everything's tracking towards that. And then out of nowhere, I don't know one person in the game who knew this was happening, which in itself is a masterstroke by Souths, how they were able to keep this under wraps and have no talk and almost leaving the Broncos feel comfortable about the fact that Haas was going to stay. And meanwhile, for some period of time, behind the scenes, Wayne and Souths had been working on getting the most formidable forward in the game to their club next year, leaving the premiers. Yeah, it's just astonishing.
That's the part of the story that I love. Like, I love that this...
You love this story.
Because
you love it.
Right?
You love that he got away with it without any of us knowing.
I do, and there's a part to it too, because I remember reading some quotes from Wayne about Keon leaving, and geez, Wayne's speaking pleasantly about Keon, and then I'm thinking...
So now you think he knew back then?
Well, no, I don't. But then I thought, well, if Keon leaves South Pack, he's their most athletic forward, the guy that can break a line, create momentum, and Latrell's going to need some of that. And then a couple of days later, the most athletic, gifted, line-breaking front rower in the game moves over to South. So, look, Paul will know fact and fiction from this story. There's so many different parts to it. But I could just imagine Wayne making a couple of phone calls in and around the stealth mission, meeting in places that no one could see or whatever, and the fact that they could clean move across, a huge talking point, and it actually puts Wayne's stand in the game back on an even bigger stage, because he just got the best front rower in the world to come across to his football club.
Yeah,
I think the part to it that, it feels somewhat, because it happens so quickly. I mean, you're talking about Wayne maybe thinking about it at the Keon stage, maybe knowing that was an option, but by all reports, this literally unfolded from a Friday to a Sunday. Is that how you?
Well,
is that
that's one version of the story. Yeah. My understanding is that these deals don't get done in 2 days, and this had been moving along behind the scenes with no one knowing about it for some time. Now, they may have started with Latrell and David Fafita, putting out reaching out to Payne and saying, mate, if you want to consider coming down here, you'd love the joint. Wayne's a great coach. And Payne also knew, because he's had a relationship with Wayne going back to 2018 when he debuted under him at the Broncos. And throughout that to now, and all the challenging periods Payne's gone through with his life, Wayne stayed in contact with him. And so then you got to the stage where Keon had gone to Wayne on Christmas Eve, I think it was, and told him that he was taking up the offer at the Dragons, and Wayne was, he was serious about the fact that he was happy for Keon because he's doing what's best for his life. The Rabbitohs couldn't match the offer, the 5-year offer that was on the table. But then when you look through all the front rowers, the elite 10 front rowers in the game, and look at who was available for that 2027 season, there was one bloke, and it was Payne Haas. And how the Rabbitohs orchestrated this and got under Brisbane's guard is just magnificent.
Yeah, I don't think it happened in 2 days. I think there's a bit more to it than that. And the phone calls and the relationship. Again, like Wayne is obviously a father figure to a lot of the players that come through under his leadership, right? And Payne Haas has had some challenges in his personal life that not too many other people have had to face up. And I truly believe, like, again, I'm not part of the conversation and ringing around and finding out, but Payne, to me, has this relationship with Wayne that he can rely on him, trust him, that with some deep conversations, and maybe that is the honest part of this whole thing. Maybe with Payne being, the grand figure of his family, that he wanted to feel comfortable with another person in his life that could say, hey, don't do this, hey, do this. Try and be this type of man for your kids and your brothers and sisters and things like that. So I like to feel that the nice part of this story is the reality of it, but the football part of it, geez, he's a hell of a player. And it puts South back in the premiership window. And thinking about it, it probably puts more pressure on Latrell Mitchell to be the main man, because Wayne has got the ability to win grand finals. Payne has the ability to get a team on the front foot. Now, Souths are going to have some gun player like a Reece Walsh to come up with the plays. Latrell is one of the biggest moment players in our game.
But he'd be absolutely loving that.
So I think it's a great move from Wayne, and I love the story.
Of course. And before we get on to what it means for South, let's just talk about the fallout for Brisbane, because that's a huge story in itself. They're the premiers. You've gone down the wholesome line that he's moving to South for the coach, for Wayne Bennett, for that father figure.
Am I wrong?
Obviously in rugby league we're all sus, right? Paul, we're sus on why he's leaving.
I don't swallow it that simply as,
There must be more to this, right? Because why would you leave the premiers?
I'll say it this way. I'm not saying that Payne has particularly fallen out with Michael Maguire, right? And it's his coaching techniques, his hard-ass coaching techniques that's drove him away from the club. But there's no question in the world it's Bennett's ability to bring those players in and cuddle them and give them advice and be that father figure that has attracted him. So Payne obviously felt he wasn't getting that at the Broncos, or he needed a change. He had been there for 10 years, but they just won a premiership. He was getting the same amount of money. His life's up there. Even his manager came out and said Brisbane is his town, the Broncos are his club, and that's his life, yet he's chosen to move away from that. There was talk last year during the season when Payne was playing injured at one point that he needed a break, and there's no question in the world that the rugby league rumour mill was in overdrive, that Payne wasn't particularly happy with how some things were being managed at the time. That's as true as we come. That was being spoken about at every level. Okay, so it was coming out of the Broncos club. Doesn't always necessarily mean that it's right, but it was definitely a conversation. And I think when Payne would look back at what he's achieved so far and in the 10 years and the way he's driven his body, he would also have to think, how can I get the most out of my future? And I do think that there is a stark contrast between Wayne's coaching and Madge's coaching that would have been an attraction to Payne to try and get the most out of his body for as long as he can, for his family as well.
And there was a comment from his manager saying that he wants to grow. He wants to, he's at the peak of his powers, he is the best in that position, but he wants to grow. So whether he feels like the way that Madge does things, like you say, is not going to get that for him, and maybe the way Bennett does things is a better approach for him.
To win a grand final, a lot of things have to go well. Yeah. And you cannot cover up cracks in a team, whether it's a coach, whether it's playing stands, whether it's fitness, whether it's lacking skill. Premiership winning teams don't cover up all those cracks and get lucky. Craig Bellamy tipped me over the red line basically every second week for 14 years in terms of training standards, right? So every premiership winning team trains hard. And I feel like, again, I'm not at the coalface of things, but I tend to believe that you can still respect, adore, the Brisbane Broncos and what they've done for you, but you can still respect and adore Wayne Bennett and make a decision purely based on that as opposed to something else. But again, maybe it's a little bit of everything that's coming together, but I like to feel that Payne Haas is a very good man for his family, and he's probably done this for the right reasons.
I think what you say there, Cooper, is another chapter to the story too, because I truly do think that Payne has won the competition up there, and he's won 6 Paul Morgan medals, and he's established himself as the game's best front rower. But there would also be a challenge, like you did late in your career, where he'd want to go on another journey and see if he can do it at multiple clubs. And I think that would have been a driving factor as well, because I know the first time that I spoke about this after the story had broken, that Michael Carianis had broken on the Telegraph, and I spoke to Bennett about it. And one of the first things he mentioned was Glenn Lazarus. Now, that goes back to 1992 when Lazo was already a champion prop who had won premierships at the Raiders, and he made that big, bold decision to go up to the Broncos. And up until then, the Broncos hadn't won anything, and Lazarus was the guy that Bennett really credits for turning that team around and turning them to, teaching them basically from being a great team to how to win. And that's what, that's one of the first things that's come out of his mind. So, that's another part of the story. But yeah, there's a lot of different angles to this story. I think would have led Payne to make the decision that he did.
Just going back and I guess putting a line under this whole Madge conspiracy that perhaps that he was training him too hard or he wasn't listening to him when it came to injuries last year. You said Craig Bellamy pushed you across the line plenty of times in training. Did he ever ask you or push you to play through injury? Were there moments like that?
Not like literally you must do it, but there was conversations at different stages. And the one thing that isn't spoken about in terms of the training intensity of a Craig Bellamy or a Wayne Bennett or a Michael Maguire, I'm pretty certain that those coaches are flexible and agile enough that if they're seeing their players teetering on the red line, lacking energy, they change and adapt for something else, right? But you can't drop your training standards. Otherwise, in the 78th minute of a grand final, you're not going to come up with a play. So the Wayne Bennett's, the Craig Bellamy's, and obviously Michael Maguire, this is me just having played under Craig, you go to the coach saying, listen, our playing group is a bit tired at the moment, we're lacking energy. We don't want to drop our training standards. Let's move a couple of other pieces around, i.e., have another half day off training or whatever it is. There's multiple ways to adapt and change, and I'm pretty certain the Broncos went through a flat spot halfway through last year. They might not have dropped their training standards, but I'm pretty certain they would have changed something else around to get the players back up and going.
Unfortunately, though, that's a scar that Michael Maguire's reputation does carry, Coop, because there is no doubt in the world that when he was at South, and I know that's a decade ago, but when he was at South, he did
push the players,
the players beyond their limits, and that led to a split in that camp on the back of his fallout with Sam Burgess that was the beginning of the end for Madge. There's no question. So he may well have learned a lot of lessons since then, but that's where this story always goes back to, because at this stage, Michael Maguire has now won 2 NRL premierships, which is amazing in itself, and a Super League title. But what he hasn't been able to achieve to this point is proving that he can not only take a team to the championship, but he can make that into,
it's hard to argue with
a period.
Yeah. So moving on to what will unfold for the Broncos now this season. We know that Payne is there for the 2026, but will this impact how they play, what happens, and it's not it's motivating, it's not going to change their star power, all of those things, but does just the storyline have an impact itself?
Yeah, I think that comes back to the culture piece, right? Like how united is a team. Look, every story is different. Look, I left Melbourne Storm. We managed to go on and still win 2017. Daly left Manly. They were top of the ladder at some stage, fell away after that. So it depends on the culture and how selfless Payne, the team and everything else is about going back to back in 2026.
But the fact that he'd put this to bed now probably is a positive for the club, whereas, players that can let it go on through the whole year.
You can mount a case for both, right? But I think the key part to whether the Broncos can go again or not is the senior leaders. I'm talking Payne, Patrick Carrigan, Ben Hunt, Adam Reynolds, Walsh, Ezra Mam. If they are genuinely united and want to do something again, they can do it. They're a scary football team when they put it together. So I would be putting a lot of responsibility on those guys to galvanise the group. No matter what we say about the Brisbane Broncos, it's up to those guys to lead the team every week at training.
It frees up a huge amount of salary cap space for beyond this season. How will it impact their roster for 27 and beyond?
Like Payne Haas's don't grow on trees, right? And
Reynolds too.
And Reynolds has made the decision to leave, which I want to ask you about in minute too. But see, so if you're trying to replace a like for like with Payne Haas, well, every other, I went through the list recently, and all the guys you'd probably put in the top 10, 15 props in the game, none are coming off contract until the end of 2027 at the very earliest. So for the Broncos, it does leave them in a bit of a jam because you just can't replace that bloke and even get anyone close to him at the moment. They'll be relying probably from guys from within, the Xavier Willisons of the world and the younger players that they have coming through. But you tell me, Coop, can you? Because all the dominant teams in recent times, every single title contender of recent times has had that dominant front rower.
It's hard to find a like-for-like replacement at different stages, but I will say this. I think Patrick Carrigan is one of the best middle forwards in the game. I think it's a chance for him to elevate himself as the dominant alpha at the Brisbane Broncos. Willison is good. So there's opportunity for others to step up. But it's also up to the Broncos' pathway and recruitment system to find that next jewel in the crown, right? They've got talent galore up there. I think they'll be okay. But I think it's more about not what the Brisbane Broncos do without Payne. It's more what South Sydney can do with Payne. Because it all of a sudden flicks them up a couple of notches up the ladder, in my opinion.
Yeah.